called? Water spirits. Nereids. And then what's the scene around the edge? What type of activity is going on here? Something that goes on at some parties on this campus on occasion. Yeah, it's a drinking contest. And who is the god who wins this? Come on, if you're going to have a drinking contest, you don't want to challenge this guy. Yeah, you're not going to outdrink Bacchus. You cannot drink Bacchus under the table. Who's the guy over here who thinks he can because he's big and strong, but he obviously is not because he needs other people to hold his big muscular body up? Yeah, Hercules. Hercules may be able to, clean the Aegean stables and hold up the sky, but not drink as much as Bacchus. He definitely doesn't have a liver for that. Okay, now we're in an art tradition that's the art of the eastern part of the Roman Empire, which survived the western by 1,000 years, but it's an art tradition that's still alive, because you can actually go into churches, including some in Fresno, and see art in this style. What do we call this art tradition? Byzantine, yes. And what do we call images like this, painted on wood panels that show holy people from the Christian religion? Yeah, they're icons. Now, there are two possibilities as to where icons came from in Roman art. Remember that one of them is mummy portraits. The idea is that after Christianity became the state religion, that ancestor worship was outlawed. So instead of ancestors, you show on things that you worship or you use as means of communicating with higher powers, saints. They're now the mediators. The other theory, and I showed you an example of this, is that people in the late Empire had wood images of gods on panels in their houses, and that this was the basis of the icons. Now you see two saints here, they're military saints, they're St. George and St. Theodore, and then at the very top of the painting you see two angels, Michael and Gabriel, and you see something else coming down. What is that in the middle that is reaching down from heaven? Yeah, it's the hand of God. And what does it represent in general? If you see God's hand coming down on something, what's going on? Well, it usually means some sort of divine intervention. Now, in this image, it could represent a couple things. One is that it represents protection for the person who owns the icon. The second thing it could represent is intermediation. After all, this looks like a game of telephone here. You have Mary and the saints who are listening to the prayer of a person. The angels are sort of like the operators kicking it upstairs. And the hand of God could represent the reception of the prayer and God's reaction to it in this case. Now, in the middle you have Mary. She's seated with Jesus on her lap. What pagan art tradition from where was this image borrowed from? They got it from an image of a specific goddess and her son from a part of the Roman Empire that was very old. Where did this originate from? Isis. From Egypt. Images of Isis holding Horus. Now, in the 9th century, some folks in the Byzantine Empire got a little bit upset with icons. They didn't think they were too cool or kosher, and they wanted to get rid of them. They were called iconoclasts. They broke up the icons. What did they object to, the icons? What did they see as being problematic about them in a Christian setting? So as contradictory to something in the Bible.
Forms of idolatry.
Yeah, that they saw them as violating the prohibition against making idols, against making graven images. And so war broke out over that. You see how art has actually inspired people to kill each other, not just what you thought it would do when you probably started in this class. Okay, this is another work of Byzantine art. We're in a place in Italy called Ravenna. We're in a church called St. Vitali. And who was the emperor who took over this city from Constantinople and who commissioned this mosaic? He redid the whole church, actually. He's the greatest emperor of Byzantine world in the 6th century? Yes, it's Justinian. Now, in this mosaic over here, first of all, who's this in the middle with the purple robe and the halo with the cross in it? No, it's not Justinian. It's Jesus, right? And what is this object that he's sitting on? Is this some sort of ergonomic furniture or a medicine ball or exercise equipment? What is he perched on? What do you call that thing? Call it an orb. What does it represent? It's a sphere, so... World. Yeah, so it represents Jesus, this ruler of the world. What event from Christian belief is this mosaic supposed to represent? What future happening is this supposed to portray? Yeah, second coming, last judgment. You got 4 rivers coming out of the ground under the big blue beach ball. What does that represent from the Old Testament, and how does that relate to the second coming? What places 4 rivers in the book of Genesis? Good thing to check out. Now, you got angels on either side of him. Who's this character over here? Got a name for him. Saint Vitalis or San Vitalis. Jesus is giving him a martyr's crown. Now, over here you have a bishop named Ecclesias. He's holding a model of a building. Why is he holding a model of a building? What is the purpose of showing him in this scene? Who was he for the original church that was built here? Okay, another thing for you to check out. And what is the action that's being shown by holding that model? Okay, this is a Byzantine manuscript, but it's not a religious one. It's about herbs and snakes. What herbs to take if you're sick, and what snakes are going to kill you. It's called the Dioscurides. The date, again, early Byzantine or 6th century. We could call this an illuminated manuscript. We call them illuminated manuscripts because many of them use gold as part of the pigment. They reflected and caught the dazzling light. Now, we know that it's an herbal, and it's dedicated to Juliana Anica, who was the patron of the manuscript. As you show here with 2 women, do these women actually exist? What are these characters that she's portrayed seated among? They're allegorical figures representing things that you should cultivate as a Christian. They're virtues. So they're generosity and prudence. And then we got a little Cupid here, who's presenting her with something. What is he holding in his hand that she's taking? It's kind of a self-referential illustration. Well, he's got the book that is being given to her in which the illustration occurs. And in terms of other images, where did they get the idea of putting Julia in the middle, flanked by 2 other women? Saw it just a couple slides ago. Who's usually portrayed in that way, with 2 angels or saints on either side? Jesus, or who else? Mary, yeah, definitely inspired here by Mary. And this was a gift to Julia Anica based on the idea that she had given a church to a town called Honorata. And now the people of that town are presenting her this book as payment in return for that. Okay, do not misspell this one, please. This is half of a set of 2 ivory panels joined together by hinges. It's based originally on a Roman writing tablet. What do we call this type of object? Do not misspell it. Don't call it a dipstick and don't call it a dipshit. It's a diptych, yes. And we call this work of art after the angel who's depicted on this diptych. And which archangel is this? It's Michael, right? So again, date 6th century, early Byzantine. And this was intended as a gift to the church. Now, this is an interesting work because it shows both what Byzantine art takes from Greek and Roman tradition and how it differs. What do you see here that reminds you of classical art, or reminds you of Greek and Roman? What about the figure, what about the setting really reminds you of those earlier art forms? Look at him, look at where he is. Well, you've got a figure that looks like a person, naturalistic. It's also idealized. He's depicted as handsome and symmetrical. He's also got this very realistic drapery going on, and he's in an architectural setting with those 2 Corinthian columns. Now, what do you see here that doesn't fit Greek and Roman naturalism? Look at this guy. Where does he actually stand in relation to this background? Where is he on these stairs, for example? Or what is his connection to this work of architecture? He seems to be kind of floating here. That's a break with earlier Greek and Roman art, but we're interested in showing you things from the outside world. You'd say, oh, he's not realistic. His feet are covering several parts of the stairs. He's too big for the doorway. He seems to be floating or hovering there. But the Byzantine artist, if you heard these criticisms, would say, so what? What? What is Byzantine art trying to show you? What is the emphasis in Byzantine art, rather than showing the world as your ordinary eye sees it? What do they want to convey? Yeah, spiritual reality. So yeah, the angel could float. More power to him, because he's supposed to represent something that's transcendent. Okay, now time to get medieval. What ethnic group, which came from Northern Europe and settled in England in the 7th century, made this purse? The Angles, the Jutes, and who is the other group who made this? Yes, Saxons, right? And it comes from Sutton Hoo. The material are gold garnets and glass. And the archaeological context, if you remember, was the ship burial of the king. You have the pieces of garnets and colored glass set in little gold cages. This is called cloisonne. And the styles come from different areas. This centerpiece comes from the animal style of Northern Europe. The birds, the eagles ripping the ducks to shreds, representing the king's power, comes also from Scandinavia. And the images of the hero wrestling the animals comes from Greek and Roman art, ultimately all the way back from the Middle East. So the date would be around 625 Christian era, or early medieval will just do it too. This is a page from a book. The book comes from a monastery in northern England that contains the 4 Gospels of the New Testament. It's called the Lindisfarne Gospels. The date for it, again, 8th century or early medieval. And the style is Hiberno-Saxon. It combines Celtic motifs with things drawn from the Germanic peoples who invaded England. Now, you see this page, it's called a carpet page because it represents decorative designs that art historians used to think were borrowed from textiles. You have this very elaborate scroll work, and if you look at it closely, it's actually creatures with claws and beaks eating each other. That comes from the northern animal style. But the interlacing becomes a lot more complex and very precisely constructed, which comes from ultimately from Irish Celtic art. And manuscripts were decorated in medieval Europe both as offerings to God and as the only ways that monks could attain some sort of recognition. Remember, these guys are committed to celibacy, they're committed to poverty and humility and obedience. The only way they can get any fame is by either their devotion or by their artwork. And some of them actually became saints as a result. Okay, this is one we left off on in the last class. Comes from Spain, the Tabra Beatus. The style is Mozarabic, which means sort of like wannabe Arabs. The date, now, remember it was made at 9 in the morning on July 27th at 970 Christian era. I'm not going to hold you to that. That would be cruel and unusual punishment. If you say 970, that's all good. If you say early medieval, that's cool too. You need to know the name of the artist and the scribe there. and also what the Beatus book was about. It's a commentary on the book of Revelation, but it also represents the hope that the folks had that the Muslims would be kicked out of Spain. But it doesn't show in this case a scene from the Bible. It shows the monastery where the book was produced. You have the two authors, the scribe and the artist, Demetrius and Signor, painted here. And yet, ironically, this is an anti-Muslim book, but the architecture of the place where they're painting, as you see in this bell tower, is purely Islamic. And this one we just went over, the Abbey Church at Corvey. That's the west work, so know that. And our very last image is this giant candlestick. Don't think that it's a tomb or anything monumental. That's its purpose. Know the guy who set it up, which is Bernhard of Hildesheim. Know the material, bronze, and the symbolism that I just went over with you in class. Authority, antiquity, Rome, referring to Solomon's temple, purification by fire. Know that it's based on Trajan's column. Know the way it differs from Roman style, and that the designs are more geometric and abstract, and that they tell the story of Jesus rather than a Roman emperor, and know the purpose of the column. So, that's the end of the review. Now you guys, if you want to stick around and do the student evaluation, I'm trying to do that. A disclaimer first, though.